Alright, we're back, of course, talking some FF7. We're here to look at both these interviews that dropped with Naoki Hamaguchi yesterday, one with VG247, and one with SquareEnix.com, where he talks about the Nibelheim flashback, but it does seem to be a first-parter, because it actually says that in the title. The title of that article is Flashback to the Flashback Part 1, Building Nibelheim, so I assume we're going to get a follow-up article at some point. I don't know what else we're talking about from these interviews, other than what I've seen shared from people on social media and stuff, so we're going to kind of just hop right into it, because I don't know how long the video is going to be. We're going to start with the VG247 article. The first bit of this article isn't necessarily worth reading. It's just whoever's writing the article talking about character models and how good they look in the Remake trilogy, mainly for the main party, but how like NPCs in Remake and also Rebirth look a little bit older. In Remake, they look like PS3 character models, and Rebirth, they look like PS4 character models. And I like the PC version, of course, is the optimal version of Rebirth. And specifically start talking about the NVIDIA DLSS, and that's where Hamaguchi comes in. I do want to add really quickly, though, that while I can agree that, the main party character models in Remake and Rebirth look really, really good. I mean, if you get, like, the close-ups in some of the cutscenes, you can see little fucking hairs on their face and shit, little blemishes and stuff. I don't think that the basic kind of NPCs in Remake and Rebirth look bad. I don't even know if I would compare them to PS3 graphics, because they're definitely better than PS3. Definitely not trying to say that Square Enix is pushing the limits of technology creating background NPCs in a game, right? Because it's definitely not the case. And specifically with Remake, I don't know if I noticed it at all in Rebirth. There's a lot of repeated NPCs, right? Like you go to like an area and you'll see like the same character model like 3 or 4 times in a very short distance, that's quite annoying. But like the quality of the character models, I don't think was ever bad. I can't think of a time where I looked at a character model and was like, that looks like shit. In recent years, we have seen similar technology incorporated in consoles as well as PC platforms, such as the upscaling technology known as PSSR on the PS5. I think that this kind of upscaling will become standard on consoles too. People are now paying attention to DLSS FG frame generation technology on PC environments, so I think that we need to keep watching future developments in the market. One market development that Square Enix has been laser focused on with this port is the Steam Deck. This is one thing developers clearly put a lot of stock in optimizing towards, and the result can be seen in the final release. While FF7 Rebirth is doubtless a better experience on a high-end rig, if you want to play one of the PS5's best games on the go without getting into some sort of streaming situation, it's now very much possible. Before we let Hamaguchi talk for a while, I do want to add really quickly that the Steam Deck is a great way to play the game, but it definitely had problems. Maybe those have been resolved now because the game's been on PC for a few weeks at this point. But it definitely had like issues, like a lot of games do when they first come to Steam Deck, right? Like just because a game is Steam Deck verified doesn't mean it plays flawlessly. There's definitely like issues, and even just in general, the PC version of Rebirth obviously had issues. It seems to maybe be like a Square Enix issue. I don't know how 16 did on PC, but I know like 7 Remake, 7 Rebirth, and like Final Fantasy 15, which this article mentions, they all had their issues when they first come to PC. Maybe still do to this day. I don't know. We said Steam Deck compatibility is one of our goals for porting FF7 Rebirth to PC and ensure that the game would run stably on it using the minimum level graphics settings, Hamaguchi says, also stating that the market share for Steam Deck devices is significant. In order to make sure we could offer a good level of visual quality even on relatively lower spec machines, we completely reworked the LOD reduction for background modeling. The reduction process here involves lowering the total number of polygons while still keeping the original shape of models. The general way this is done is to use reduction tools such as Simplygon to automatically lower the polygon count. However, we needed to reduce the number of polygons in the backdrops even further to ensure stable running on even lower spec PCs, and the automated reduction processing is limited in how far it can maintain quality of form when you take it that far. To address this, we identified the areas where the results of the automated reduction processing were not up to our standard and went back to adjust the assets by hand in those cases. This involved checking over a huge amount of different assets and required a significant time to do, but I feel that we achieved just the right balance between automation and work done by hand. I'm very satisfied that this resulted in getting the Steam Deck verified confirmation from Valve. So to me that's kind of interesting just because I'm aware of when they port a game to like a handheld console like the Switch or I guess also the Steam Deck, they lower the quality, but I wasn't sure how that process went or how they did that exactly, but it's kind of interesting that they can lower the polygon count of something but also keep the shape, but they also did go back and like fix things that they felt weren't up to their standards, so it wasn't all automated. With the PC port of FF7 Remake, we were not able to offer graphics options to fit with players' differing PC hardware specs, so for Rebirth, we set out to change the rendering settings for the game into a more flexible system that takes the requirements of the PC version into account from the start. The LOD in the modeling is managed using a system of more than 10 different gradations, and the system automatically adjusts the grade selected based on the processing burden from the graphics and the memory limit available in order to achieve a stable frame rate. Thanks to the system, it is still possible to play with stability and a good level of visual fidelity, even on a machine that only meets the minimum required spec level. And if you have a machine that goes all the way up to the requirements for the ultra level, then you can experience graphic quality even higher than on the PS5. First bit was a little bit interesting to me just because I guess I wasn't aware that Remake didn't have like a graphic setting option when it came to PC. Like they do for Rebirth now. I know they had like the specs they put out, like your minimum and recommended specs, kind of like what Rebirth had, but I guess they didn't have like the option where you could jump between minimum, recommended, and ultra settings. I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to like the PC stuff just because I've been a console gamer my entire life, but like I know like other games generally offer like some way to switch between like lower graphics, medium, and like high graphics, right? So was Remake kind of like an outlier for not offering that on PC? That's kind of weird. More than anything, the strong PC release feels like a template for the future. While they aren't saying anything outright at this stage, all of the noises from Square Enix seem to indicate the age of their major games launching as one platform exclusives appears to be ending. More people playing these excellent games can only be a good thing. I feel that we need to be even more aware than before of not just focusing on optimization for the specs of a specific platform, but looking at rendering designs that take into account a broad range of different hardware capabilities, including PC, Hamaguchi says in the current hardware landscape. The development team has now built up a good amount of knowledge towards creating flexible graphics options that align with different hardware environments from doing the PC port of FF7 Rebirth. I'm confident that this will be very useful for us in developing the third game in the trilogy. The last bit there is the only thing I've seen from this article where he mentions the third game, just because anytime they mention the third game, talk about the third game, any sort of news for the third game, that is like, discussion worthy, of course. I assume with him talking about like the PC version of Rebirth helping with the development of the third game, probably to every degree that's helping, but I would assume he means in like the PC version of the third game. But it would be kind of nice if they could find a way to like offer us options on the console version of the third game, similar to PC in some way. I don't know how you do it exactly. You have like two options on console, right, where you can do like performance or graphics, so 4K or 60 frames. It'd be kind of cool if they could find a way to do like a third setting that's like right in the middle with like, maybe like 40 frames or something with like, not quite 4K graphics. Some sort of like kind of nice middle ground that sort of replicates what they have on PC, which is, the low, recommended, or ultra, right? Something along those lines. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because I'll probably always use performance because I prefer frame rate over graphics every time. Hop into the Square Enix interview with Hamaguchi where he talks about the Nibelheim incident, and reading the first like several paragraphs or whatever, they do specify that it is a two-part interview, I guess, or whatever. We didn't have to do much to develop Nibelheim, says director Naoki Hamaguchi. We've come back to the village several times, including in Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, so over the years, it's slowly been expanded out. What we did have to expand massively, though, is the level of detail. Kind of agree and disagree with Hamaguchi here, because I understand what he's saying in terms of, like, there's already, like, the format of what Nibelheim is from like, the original FF7, Crisis Core, things like that. But Rebirth's Nibelheim is like the biggest it's ever been. It has more buildings in Rebirth than Nibelheim's ever had in the history of FF7. That's kind of like a new building when it comes to Rebirth's version of Nibelheim with like the town hall, city hall, whatever it's meant to be. It's kind of replacing like I think like the bottom right building in the PS1 version of Nibelheim. When you first come in, there's like the the inn, like the shop, and there's like Cloud's house, Tifa's house, and then like the bottom right building you go down like a little like a ramp sort of thing to get to. That's kind of where the town hall is in Rebirth's version. If we just did a one-to-one replica of the original Final Fantasy VII or even Crisis Core, it probably wouldn't resonate with people the way it should, so we had to add that extra level of detail. In order to recreate the Nibelheim as people remember it and give this part of the story the same feeling as the original, we had to add many extra details. We had to show things in a much more comprehensive way. Yeah, Rebirth is by far my favorite iteration of Nibelheim, which I don't think is much of a surprise considering it's the most modern interpretation of it. There's obviously the nostalgic stuff for the original PS1 version and even the Crisis Core one to a certain degree. But yeah, I mean, by far, this is the best version. In Tifa's room, the eagle-eyed among you may have spotted a poster featuring the silhouette of a certain bequiffed martial artist, hell of a word to use, one who may look familiar to players of Final Fantasy VIII. We set out to put as much of that stuff as we could into the game. Certainly you'll spot plenty of references to the compilation of Final Fantasy VII titles, as well as the wider Final Fantasy series. You'll find plenty of stuff that we added just to make dedicated fans smile. The Zell poster in Tifa's room was honestly a really nice surprise when we first got the demo, because it's something I wasn't expecting, like a direct like FF8 reference, right? It makes sense because they're very similar characters, right, in terms of like how they fight and also some of their moves and shit. But it's just kind of surprising. In terms of references to other Final Fantasy games that are in Rebirth, I'm actually not entirely sure what else is out there. I want to do a video at some point looking at like all the FF10 Easter eggs that are potentially in Rebirth, just because we've looked at that a lot with Remake and shit, and obviously we looked at the connection theory a lot with 7 and 10. I don't know what else is in Rebirth. I know there's one for sure direct reference to 10, specifically Final Fantasy X-2. And it's whenever we get to Nibelheim later in the game, and Yuffie talks about the Yuffie Recon Patrol and calls it YRP for short, which is a direct reference to FF10-2, where Yuffie, Riku, and Pain call themselves YRP for short.
Start our own Spec Ops unit, the Yuffie Recon Patrol! They'll stand in awe of the fair ninja who leads her loyal minions, and tremble in fear when they see the YRPs coming in hot! YRP in position. It's showtime, girls.
I've also seen people mention that like the pedestal they put the keystone on in Rebirth is kind of similar to the pedestals that are in the Cloister of Trials in 10. And then also when Aerith is inside the Temple of the Ancients and like kind of the dance she does, I think towards the beginning, once y'all get in there, is similar to like unidancing when she's like sending, people or whatever. I don't know, I haven't like really looked at those side by side, but those are at least the ones I'm kind of aware of for 10. But be sure and let me know if there's any other kinds of like Easter eggs or references specifically to 10, because I would definitely like to do that video at some point, but also just kind of any of the other Final Fantasy games. The important thing to remember about the journey from Nibelheim to the reactor is that most of that section wasn't playable in the original Final Fantasy VII. It's told through cutscenes up to the part where the party falls down from the road bridge, so while memorable, none of that was an explorable area. One of the main concepts for the whole of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is to allow players to experience the actual scale of the world. We thought that if we replicated this section from the original, from arriving in the village through to the road bridge, it just wouldn't communicate that sense of scale. You also wouldn't get the geography of the region, how far Mount Nibel is from the village itself, where the Mach reactor is in comparison, and so on. That's why we added lots of extra playable sections in there to give you a feeling of how big it's supposed to be. Which is very true, because even if you ignore like the calm flashback segment of the original FF7, even when you get to Nibelheim later in the story, when you walk out of like the north of the town, you're on the world map and you walk a very short distance and then you're at Mount Nibel, right? You don't really get that sense of scale of like the distance between the town and the mountain or the travel from the town to the mountain, right? You're just kind of there instantly, whereas like Rebirth actually lets you kind of experience that whole journey, right? Which is a big reason why I'm a fan of like the remake trilogy, right? That's kind of what I wanted, is like FF7 in my mind, what it felt like as a kid. And that's kind of what they're doing, especially with Rebirth, right? Where like the distance between locations and traveling up and down mountains like Mount Corel and stuff like that, like those all feel like what they felt like when I was a kid, but they're actually like expanded in a modern sense, right? As well as scale, we also wanted to ensure connectivity with other games in this series. For example, there were some parts added to the Nibel area in Crisis Core. We wanted to pull from those in order to make the games feel consistent. So while I do love me some Crisis Core, and Zack is my favorite character, I'm not super knowledgeable in the game of Crisis Core in terms of like remembering everything in it. I don't really know what all was added to the Nibel area that he's referencing here, except for maybe the Shinra Manor, which I almost talked about earlier in the video when I was talking about Nibelheim and how it's different compared in Rebirth compared to like the original game in Crisis Core. Because the Shinra Manor is kind of like off away from the town in Crisis Core, whereas with the original game, when you walk into Nibelheim, it's all one like area. You just walk up there and go in the manor, right? Crisis Core, you like walk to the north of the town and you go through like a load screen into like a different area. There's like a save point there, and then you walk like I think to the left, and you go to like another load screen to get to the Shinra Manor, right? It's like kind of like off away from the town versus the original game. And it's kind of how it is in Rebirth, where you walk north out of town, you gotta walk up a little ways and then to the left to like get to the manor. Maybe that's what he's kind of referencing there. I'm not entirely sure, but it does give me a bit of hope that maybe they'll add some more compilation stuff to the third game. I talked about it in a recent video. Then maybe hopefully doing like Nibelheim in the Icicle Inn area, because they kind of need stuff to flesh out a whole region anyways, because Icicle Inn's nothing in the original game, right? And Nibelheim is where Cloud and Zack first met on a mission, right? So it'd be kind of cool to have that location in the third game. While there are plenty of threats on the way to the Mount Nibel reactor, the first section of the journey there is surprisingly peaceful. In fact, it serves as an introduction to the game as the camera pulls back, a wonderful new arrangement of the main theme plays, and credits display on the screen. Why add the credit crawl here? Hamaguchi says, in most Final Fantasy games you have an opening movie, which typically includes the logo, and sometimes credits. It's been handled in that traditional fashion for quite a long time. For this game, we wanted to do it a bit differently, not as a cutscene, but instead have the credits over the screen while people were actually playing. That was one reason we decided to do it this way. But yeah, credits over gameplay was definitely detail I very much appreciated when I first played FF7 Rebirth, in the demo, of course. It's not something I was thinking about whenever I was playing, like, where was the credits at? It never even crossed my mind. So once you start walking out of the town and it starts throwing credits up on screen as you're running around, it was a nice surprise. There was another reason too. When I first saw Kazushika Nojima's storyline for that section, we worked out that there's this journey from the village of Nibelheim through to the reactor. It's about 1 kilometer of distance, so travel takes up a fair amount of time. We thought that rather than just fill out the area with battles, it'd be a nicer pace if we just had players experience the scenery, the nature around Mount Nibel, to see what kind of area it actually is. We also thought that we could have some conversations between characters and start setting the scene as well. Adding the credits over the top of that let us do all that in a nice and balanced way. The final sequence is very effective. The combination of visuals, music, and dialogue create a feeling of anticipation for the mission ahead of our heroes. As Hamaguchi says, it also acts as a kind of a notice to the player that this is where things get going. You've had time to explore the village and meet the characters. Now it's time to step into the wilderness and to where the game really begins. I do like the direction they went with Rebirth, where when you leave the village, you aren't fighting immediately, right? You get to like kind of explore the scenery a bit, and the characters talk, and the credits roll, stuff like that. Like, that's all great. I will say you don't really walk like that far before you're fighting. Like, you fight relatively soon after, leave the village. I do like that bit of time we have with our characters where they get to like talk and interact and stuff. Cloud, Sephiroth, and Tifa. That's actually the end of this article, and when I got to the end of it, came across something a little bit interesting. This article, I don't know if it's actually new. Now, when you get to the top of the article, it does say February 5th, 2025. But at the bottom, it talks about come back for part 2, and it mentions like April 16th, which is obviously not April 16th yet. It actually says April 16th next week specifically. And it actually have a link to part 2. When you go to part 2, it's from like last year. I'm not entirely sure what's happening because they definitely tweeted this article out the other day like it was a new article. And again, like the article itself says that it's February 5th, 2025 whenever it was posted. Maybe they updated it or changed the article, altered the article. I don't entirely know. But kind of weird. So have we already talked about this article before, like last year or some shit? And actually, I went down the rabbit hole a bit more here. So at the bottom of the article that we just read, if you click the link to the second, article or whatever, it gives you the original date of like April 16th, 2024. But if you actually go to their Twitter where they tweet out these articles, it sends you to the exact same article but with the updated date. So I don't know, they're like they're just like recycle these articles like they're new information or something, because they're not. A little bit frustrating because we might have read that article last year and I just kind of wasted time reading through it and talking about it like it's like new information, when it's in fact damn near year-old information. Super exciting. I'm glad I did that. I thought it was kind of weird too, because I got to the end of the article, like past the last Hamaguchi quote, and I read the last paragraph to myself just to see if it mentions when the second part will be coming out, and it mentions April. And I was like, what the fuck? And it says like next week April. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And I clicked on the link to the second article, and then it said April 16th, 2024. And then I followed the link on Twitter, and it's February 5th or whatever, February 6th, 2025. And it's like, what is going on? Like, are they that like desperate for like, I guess, content or people to talk about the game that they're taking old articles and like repurposing them to make them pass as new articles or something? I don't know. It's weird. It's fucking. So that might be the strangest conclusion to a video I've ever made. So we're just gonna wrap it up there. That's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter @YT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame, we blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.